We are approaching 2 lost decades, 20 years of basically zero median wage growth, zero wage growth for the person in the middle. And that to me is the sign that we are a poor country.
I think this country is grinding to a halt.
They've had to produce a planning application that runs to 360,000 pages. And the 360,000 pages
of what?
And the production of the production of this planning document has cost £297 million. The world's longest road tunnel is in Norway and was built. The entire project cost less than the planning application for this tunnel. Everybody wants a veto. And as a result, nothing happens. Nothing gets built. Vetoes are always used. What we've got wrong are things that we could fix. You and I could fix in 6 months.
Right, anyway, Sam, it's really glad to do this. I really like your writing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You've helped me particularly understand things from a direction which I hadn't thought about things for, especially housing. We'll get onto that. But I was trying to summarize what I think your main point is across all your articles. And I think it's that increasingly we have the boot of the state on the neck of the productive parts of society, and we're now feeling the consequences of that.
That's one way to put it. I'm not as anti-state as I think that would be. I think that states can, in the right ways, sometimes help growth. I think it's rarely happening from the center, but I think, for example, like local government can do a good job of making a city a better place to live. I think if you look at China, for example, like the story that we hear about China is Beijing driving huge amounts of growth across the country. I think that's completely wrong.
Okay.
I think, in fact, what's happening in China is local governments, city governments, having huge amounts of discretion to invest in their own cities. They capture a lot of the benefits, a lot of the spillovers, because they own the land, so they lease it out. And they get the returns from, investing in a certain industry, attracting an industry to that place. They're in competition with each other. So you don't have the kind of dead hand of like the whole country goes all in on something that I think ends up failing almost all the time.
So it's a little bit like the US federal system.
Yes. And I think that historically, that's one of the reasons the US grew so well.
Competition.
It wasn't competition, right? But it wasn't just that, the state didn't do anything. It was that the federal government didn't do that much, but city governments often did a lot. They would build infrastructure, they'd build airports, and, places like Atlanta, Chicago, those kinds of things make a huge difference. So my take is not really that like the state is always the problem. It's that centralized states very, very, very rarely succeed in driving growth other than by removing barriers to growth. But local governments, with the right incentives, can drive growth. And investing in infrastructure is one really, really good way they can.
Right. That's really interesting because we are a centralized nation.
One of the most centralized countries in the world,
yeah.
Britain.
And our local governments, really the central government here has been offloading a lot of its problems to local governments in terms of delegating them to pay for certain provisions they want to give. And local councils don't really have the ability to change too much locally on the tax front.
Yeah.
And so really they've become, a lot of them are bankrupt or near bankrupt, and they've become dysfunctional.
Yeah. So to my mind, the story of like British history or modern British history is the Victorian era all the way up to, the Edwardians, all the way up to the Second World War, really. You have extremely decentralized government. You have city governments that have a lot of discretion to invest in public works, to invest in better sanitation, electrification, things like that. And they collect a lot of the taxes that they raise. So, they build a lot of houses, they build a lot of infrastructure, they get rich. A really amazing example is in the 1880s, Manchester, Manchester is not by the sea, but the Manchester city government built or invested in a canal linking Manchester to the sea and turned it into the third busiest port in Britain, right? Like that to me is an example of the system of local government working really well. And then what happens in the 1940s, first because of the Second World War, because we kind of try to treat Britain as a single centrally planned entity. And in wartime, that kind of thing, just about works because you've got one really narrow focus, which is like build airplanes, build tanks, build machine guns.
Kill Nazis,
which we did pretty well. But then after that, they draw the lesson like, hey, we can just run the whole economy on these lines. Right. The Attlee government gets in, the Labour government comes in 1945. they nationalize huge amounts of the economy. Today we think about them nationalizing like water, electricity. They nationalized all road haulage. So like all of these independent truck drivers suddenly found themselves working for this single company. I mean, completely crazy things. They nationalized entirely the land use system. So previously it had been local governments deciding on what could get built and what couldn't, and they generally allowed lots of things to get built.
Did it work though? Centralizing a lot of it for a short period of time?
No, it was disastrous.
Complete disaster.
You can look at the performance of the British economy compared to the US, and it drops by like 10 or to 15 percentage points in this very short period. Right, there is just a huge drop. And it's not like we're like continental Europe. We had been bombed, but we had not been anywhere nearly as destroyed as continental Europe, which really was in ruins at that point. The nationalizations locked the country into basically, I think, poverty. And they destroyed huge amounts of value. But one of the things they did was centralize everything around land use, everything around infrastructure. They wanted these gigantic monolithic companies to run infrastructure and to plan everything. And it was a total failure. And I think the story of a lot of growth since then has been unwinding that. And I don't think we've unwound nearly enough of it. I think there's so much more to do. I think we're still living in the shadow of the 1940s. And that's a big reason for why we're so poor today.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say why we're so poor today, because I don't think a lot of people think we are poor.
Yeah.
I mean, we had that study where we're poor in the Mississippi. But a lot of people still think we're a rich nation. And I've found it really interesting that you pointed to us we really need to consider ourselves as a developing nation.
Yeah. So I actually think every developed country is a bit like a developing country. So what I mean by that is there are two ways of thinking about growth, or two ways of getting growth. One is innovation, new ideas, basically like pushing out the frontier of ideas. Obviously, to some extent, we have that. Like AI is a great example. Crypto is a great example. Like, there are loads of areas where we are actually really, really impressive. But most of the growth that you do as a country is just adopting ideas from other places and just catching up with the frontier. So if you look at a country like Poland, Poland has grown unbelievably. It's tripled in wealth per person since the end of communism. And almost all of that has just been driven by bringing in ideas, bringing in investment from overseas, and just catching up with the frontier. It's, Poland does have some amazing, impressive companies, and there is quite a bit of innovation that goes on in Poland, but it's not innovation that's really driving the kind of Polish growth machine. It's catching up. And my take, or my view, is that Britain is also a catch-up country. Like, we are so far now behind where we could be. We're so far behind the trend of where we were going to be. So, between around 1980 and 2008, we were one of the fastest growing major economies on earth. We overtook Italy, we overtook France, we overtook Germany, depending on how you look at it. We were converging with the United States. And in the mid-2000s, there were points where, £1 was equal to $2. It was
first time I went to the US, $2.05.
Yeah, it was, kind of unthinkable today that would be the case. But we were growing like gangbusters. Then something happened in around 2008.
What was that?
What was that? The
to
crisis,
do with mortgage?
Of course.
Yeah.
And since then, we've basically had 2 lost decades. I think we are approaching 2 lost decades, 20 years of basically zero median wage growth, zero wage growth for the person in the middle. And that to me is the sign that we are a poor country. Like, we are much poorer than we should be, and we are much poorer than I think we easily could be. And so, one of the things that you might be surprised about is, although I think we're in a pretty terrible position right now, I'm actually really optimistic about Britain, because I think that solving the problems that we have is really easy, really simple. And
I totally agree. I mean, I had it today where I went on Twitter, I see a tweet from Andy Burnham.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm reading it, and he says, I'm just sad at seeing pubs and clubs closed down. I'm going to reduce their business rates by 20%. Yeah, because he wants to support them. I owned a club.
Yeah.
I own a cafe, right? I own businesses. And the £3,000 to £6,000 a saving you'll get from that drop in business rates is not the difference between success and failure.
Yeah.
The difference between success and failure is people having money in their pocket to go out and spend money. Inflation not ripping so hard that we have to absorb costs that we can't pass on to the customers. Energy costs that are just beyond comprehension at the moment, but also the regulatory environment of minimum wage, all the different things the state enforces on us. That's the problem. they've got it to the point where you cannot. It's really hard to make a medium-sized business, little local business work. It's just so hard, and that's where I feel like they're getting it wrong because they don't understand what it's like to run a business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking at it. I absolutely just ripped into it and just I'm sick of this because we have people in this country who are hungry to build businesses. I can't be bothered anymore, Sam. Like, I sold my bar. I was going to open a pizza shop. I'm not going to bother doing it. I've just given up because I look at the cost of a business and I look at the opportunity to say it isn't there. I might as well invest in assets. Mm-hmm. Now, you scale that up through the country. How many people are like that?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's how have we got to a point where we have some of the most unimpressive, inexperienced people making the most consequential decisions for the country?
Yeah. I think that to me is the, let's say, £1 trillion question. How do we get better people into every layer of government? How do we get better people into the civil service? Probably a lot fewer people, but better people. How do we get better people into Parliament? How is it that I would say if you look back at the prime ministers we've had since Theresa May, I think we've basically had kind of the most inept 5 or 6 people in a row. Not that they were all stupid by any means, but they were not suited for the job of being prime minister. And I don't think that that's a unlucky coincidence. I think that's a sign that we just don't have the right people. We don't have the raw surplus of good people going into politics. Partly because politics is a miserable job. It's horrible. You don't earn very much money, especially compared to what I would want. The quality of person I would want to go into Parliament.
But hold on, Sam,
should be able to earn a lot more than they earn in Parliament.
That's the point.
And they have no career prospects. They're almost certainly going to end in failure.
They might get murdered.
They might get murdered.
Yeah,
they might get murdered. It's a dangerous job. They have the highest. I think members of Parliament have the highest murder rate of possibly any profession in Britain. It's a really, really, really messed up situation, and so it doesn't surprise me that people are very, very reluctant to go into politics when they have other options.
Well, so you said that it's not paid well. It's interesting because a lot of people will listen and think, hold on, they're going in 90 grand a year. That's well above the average.
Yeah.
But I think the point they're missing is like, if you're like, I think I could do an okay job as an MP. I don't think I'd be the best.
I think you'd be a good MP.
I know enough, and I don't need the money, right? But if I was starting out in my career now as an ambitious person, my ceiling of about 90k, unless I become prime minister, I'd be like, I kind of want that as a minimum on my basic, and I want to earn a bonus. I want to be earning 150, 200. I want to know how to get to £400,000 a year. Those people are not going into politics.
Yeah. I want people who could be chief executives of important companies going in, and I don't want them to have to say to their families, all right, to do this, we're going to have to significantly cut our living standards compared to what we could be doing otherwise. Your lives are going to be miserable because everybody's going to hate me and they're going to kind of pick on you. I probably won't succeed. I probably won't get a job as a minister. If I get a job as a minister, I'll be the junior minister for fish. I probably won't be able to do anything. And then, 5 years down the line, my party will lose and I'll be out of a job. And the last 5 years was a waste of time. Like, some of those things are non-negotiable. Some of that's just politics. But there are lots of things we could do, I think, that would make it a bit more attractive for people with lots of options to go into politics.
Pay £500,000 a year.
£500,000 a year. Give them big professional staff. Right now, if you're a member of Parliament, you have maybe 1, 2, 3 people whose job it is to be social workers, whose job it is to help you with policy. I think, why don't we just give MPs professional staff of 10, 20 people, say to their constituents, the job of being an MP today is de facto being a social worker. I don't think we can change that because I think there's always an incentive for an MP to do that. It's one of these problems where it's like a prisoner's dilemma. It would be better if no MP acted like a social worker to their constituents, but it's always good for you as an individual MP to do that because it will make you more popular. So why don't we just say, this is in fact what the system does, but why don't we give you 15 people who can act as social workers? So that's no longer part of your job. And, the constituents are happy because they're being better taken care of. You're happier because you're not spending so much of your time, figuring out how to rescue cats from trees. And you can focus on what we actually want them to do, which is reading and scrutinizing legislation.
Yes.
And doing so well.
This show is brought to you by my lead sponsor, Iron, the AI cloud for the next big thing. IRON builds and operates next-generation data centers and delivers cutting-edge GPU infrastructure, all powered by renewable energy. Now, if you need access to scalable GPU clusters or are simply curious about who is powering the future of AI, check out iron.com to learn more, which is IREN.com. Let me tell you a story. So my daughter's just finished her GCSEs and she's preparing for her A-levels next year. And they've set her some homework for the 4 modules. She's chosen four subjects. And she gets to drop one of them. And she picked art because she's an artist. And I love that. She chose philosophy on her own. I was like, that's great.
Yeah.
That's going to make for great dinner time. She chose film studies. Great, love it. Well, you know, we watch a lot of movies as a family. And she chose economics.
Oh, good for her.
She chose it because of me.
Yeah.
And she got set some work. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 stories to tell you, actually. This is funny. But she's been set some work over the summer for all the courses. You know, we did the economics piece. I helped her with it, which I need to tell you about after. We did the economics work, and then yesterday I picked her up and I was talking about it, the work, because I was excited. And I said, are you going to, which subject do you think you would give up? She said, probably economics. Probably economics. And I said to her and her mum, I said, I want to make my case for why you should do it. And I said, economics is like taking a language. If you understand economics, you can understand what the government's saying, you can understand what's bullshit, you can understand what's true, and you can plan your life. So that was my case I made for her. And then I was thinking, why are we not teaching economics like we teach math, English, and languages, history and geography? Economics to me should be one of those subjects because it's a language of navigating life.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many. My favorite book, and I recommend it to your daughter, is The Undercover Economist by Tim Harford. That's my favorite kind of entry-level way of understanding the world with economics. It explains why, you know, a Starbucks coffee, a large, costs £1.50 more than a small, even though it costs them like a penny more or like less than a penny more. It explains like small everyday things like that. And it gives you these tools for just understanding much, much more of the world that I think most people think economics is like the Financial Times, spreadsheets, really big like inflation and things like that. And yeah, sure it is. But it's also like, why has the business decided not to put tables and chairs out the front today? Like, why has the business decided to do cocktails? Why is a coffee shop doing cocktails in the evening? It's understanding things like, you know, fixed costs versus marginal costs, and like how that actually relates to the life that you live. It's really, really useful. The trouble is, I think my argument against teaching it in schools is that is the surest fire way of making kids hate it. I think if you want children to hate, or young people to hate something, force them to learn about it in school. I hated school, and every book that we had to learn in English class, I now hate. Lord of the Flies. I think like Lord of the Flies, I just hate that book because I remember how being taught it and just really, really, really being annoyed at having to learn it. So my only argument against, I do basically agree with you, but my only real argument is I want people to love economics. I think it's such a powerful way of thinking about the world.
Well, I'm going to get her that book. I mean, I started her on Hayek and gave her The Road to Serfdom. It's probably a little bit brutal. I'll tell you the other interesting point. This was the thing that fascinated me. So the first question was about the war in Ukraine. It was talking about 30% of wheat productions in Ukraine. And it said there's going to be issues with, potentially issues with supply. And there was some question about, why will this cause inflation? And I looked at that and went, no, this is a supply shock.
Yeah.
Inflation comes from monetary expansion. There's no monetary expansion here. You're teaching them wrong. So I actually said to her, I said, you need to be the rebel in the class and you need to come back and you need to tell them why the question is flawed. And so that got her sparked. Yeah. And so the next thing I talked to her about was I showed her a tweet from Andy Burnham. He said he's going to be knocking £45 off with the VAT on energy. And he said he's going to be putting £45 back in people's pockets. And I said, tell me what is wrong with this statement. She said, well, it wasn't their £45 in the first place. And I was like, yes, we've got you, you little rebel.
And they're going to have to raise the £45 in tax from somewhere else.
Yes, well,
because they're not cutting spending. You know, cutting taxes is great, but if you don't cut spending, then you're going to raise taxes somewhere else.
Well, I imagine the taxes are going to come in 2030.
Yes. That's true.
I think that's what we're going to face. So look, I think, I mean, I'm going somewhere with this, sorry, these little stories, is that I think the nation senses something's wrong. half the nation senses there's a problem with the state, too much taxation, too much regulation, too much in the way, and half the nation thinks it's the fault of billionaires. And I think there's a story to be told about both. But the ideology of like the political wings and the lack of real understanding of economics is what's causing us a lot of problems, because I see things like Jeremy Corbyn this week talking about renters' rights.
Yeah.
You see Andy Burnham just spending money without cutting spend, and you know that what that's going to mean is that we're going to get even more borrowing, which is more inflation. So I feel like one of the biggest, the crisis we face in democracy is people don't actually understand what they're voting for.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are two really, really great evils that underlie what you're talking about. And you already touched on one, which is inflation.
Yeah.
I think inflation is hugely underestimated by economists as an evil. I think economists don't actually have a great model, for the most part, of why inflation is so destructive. And I think the reason that it's so destructive is that it breaks trust. So you have, as a normal person, you have a certain expectation that the money in your bank account and the money in your savings account will have a certain ability to buy something in 1 year, 2 years, whatever. You will be able to plan for the future, and you will be able to trust that things will cost in a predictable amount. And what inflation does is it completely discombobulates that, and it breaks the trust between you and the state, between you and society, between you and the businesses that you transact with. It feels like something it feels like the businesses are ripping you off. In fact, we know inflation is a kind of system-wide phenomenon, but it feels as if suddenly all of the expectations and all of the kind of implicit deals that you have with each other are breaking down, and people are ripping you off everywhere you turn. So that's one. And I think that's a really, really important factor in why periods of inflation, or high inflation, are often followed by periods of incredible political extremism. Because I think once you feel that the deal that you have had with the businesses in your life, with the state, with the people around you, with the economy, once you feel that they are letting you down on that deal, you start to say, okay, well, screw this. I'm going to look for people who like, the system isn't working. The system is ripping me off.
Well, this is why I think we've got this kind of like low trust society now.
I totally agree.
Where people are kind of grifting everything. I mean, I just feel like in every part of society, people are trying to rip everyone else off.
Yeah.
And it's a really unusual situation to be in. It's not like what I remember as being a Brit.
Yeah. And I think the consequence of that is suddenly ideas that you would have said, you know, that's crazy. Like rent controls across the city. Like rent controls were not a popular policy 15 years ago, 20 years ago. They were not on the agenda. People widely understood rent controls are a bad idea. They ruin cities. They lock people into housing. They give no incentive to build new housing. And now we have had this period of inflation where rents have gone up hugely. Supply obviously hasn't increased to match that. People are saying, yeah, screw landlords, you know, screw these people. These people are ripping us off. They've got us by the neck. Sure, let's look at this tool again. I think that's really, really important. And I think it also helps to explain why people are one of the many reasons people are so distrustful of the state, because the state is giving them the state is taking more and more, and from their point of view, they are paying more and more and they're getting less and less. So that's one. Inflation is massive. The other, which we've touched on, is when you have zero growth, suddenly the world becomes a zero-sum game. And for you to win, somebody else has to lose. And I think that is poison, right? That suddenly sets us against each other.
Yep.
And it means that the political system has to be about taking from one person to give to another, instead of everybody benefiting from basically pro-growth policies.
Plunder.
So yeah. I think you end up with a highly adversarial system when you have no growth. And the longer you have no growth, the more adversarial the system becomes, and the more it becomes about saying, "Oh, these billionaires, oh, these whoever, like whatever group of people you want to target." They have to have ripped me off or stolen from me or stolen from people like me, because we've had no growth. So for them to have gotten rich, for these billionaires to have gotten rich, I must have been made worse off. And I think personally, the solution to the first one is to manage your money supply properly. The solution to the second one is find the highest result policies, find that what are the ideas that won't solve everything, but that will give us the most sort of short-term growth and break the deadlock, so that the economy, the world, society becomes positive sum again. It becomes win-win again. So the thing I'm obsessed with, I'm obsessed with housing, and we'll definitely talk about that in a bit. But the reason I'm obsessed with it isn't that I think it like literally is the only problem we've got. I think it's the biggest problem we've got, but I don't think it's the only problem. But I think solving it will give us a lot of growth that then basically changes the calculus. It will give us more money, more tax revenues to cut taxes. It will make it easier to cut spending, to reform public services. It will give people a sense that things are moving in the right direction again. And so it will make all the other reforms that we need to do possible. So that's my grand theory of kind of fixing Britain, and fixing a lot of countries, but Britain especially, is find the keyhole, find the like little thing that almost nobody notices, and fix it and get growth. And once you've got growth, use that momentum to do much, much more.
Well, I'm glad you said all that. And I'm particularly glad you said inflation. So I'm as obsessed with inflation as you are with housing. Mm-hmm. I think it is pure evil. I remember we made a couple of documentaries about it. We went out to Venezuela and saw the catastrophic effects of hyperinflation, which is the complete civilizational destruction of that country. I mean, pure poverty like you've never seen.
Yeah.
Purely for the result of inflation. Mm-hmm. And that was once a origination. We also went to Argentina and saw, not as bad as Venezuela, but still saw the catastrophic effects of inflation. But I see it here. You know, I see the potholes. I see the crap on the streets. I see, underfunded police. I see people, struggling to feed their families. And all of it, I look at it through the lens of inflation and know this is something we've inflicted on ourselves.
Yep.
And I'm glad you used the word evil, because I'm different from you. I do hate the state. But I hate the state as an entity because this is entirely our cell phone. This is entirely downstream from policies where the state chooses not to live within its means, will promise the world and cannot deliver it. Well, it can, and it delivers it through inflation. And it's also particularly evil because we export our inflation to the third world in some of the most disgusting ways possible, by loading them up with debt and then stealing their resources. And so I'm particularly focused on inflation, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. But we should talk about housing, because your housing theory of everything was, so I never even thought about it. And I read the article and I was like, holy shit, man, you've really identified one of the biggest problems in this country. It becomes so obvious. You should just explain it. Explain your housing theory of everything.
So the housing theory of everything is the theory that shortages of housing don't just make us worse off by meaning we have to spend more money on housing, but also by changing almost every aspect of our lives for the worse. So our families are smaller. It's harder to have kids when you want to have kids, so the birth rate falls. You have to drive more than you might want to drive, so carbon emissions go up and pollution goes up, and you spend more time away from your kids, incidentally. Productivity goes down because people can't move to prosperous parts of the country as historically they used to. Inequality goes up, regional inequality and intergenerational inequality between older people who own their homes and younger people who don't own their homes. We get worse health because we're walking less. We get less innovation because fewer businesses are being formed because people aren't around each other enough. And the housing theory of everything says the reason that this is the case is that human beings are the ultimate resource. Human beings in almost every modern economy.
For now.
Everything. For now. We'll get into that. But for now, people matter more than anything. Economically, socially, just everything in our lives is really about the people we live around and the people we can do business with, and we can, meet in the pub and come up with ideas for businesses with and things like that. And what we try to show in the article on Works in Progress is that there is really strong evidence for this. This isn't just like what I reckon. There is really strong evidence that where you have housing shortages, you have fewer kids. Where you have housing shortages, you have less innovation, less business formation, less entrepreneurship. Where you have fewer houses, especially in productive places, you have fewer people moving to those places. And the people who do move are the best off people. And the people who are shut out are people who are relatively less educated, relatively less rich, and are shut in basically literally left behind areas. This is the thing, we use this expression left behind to talk about deprived parts of the country. And the metaphor obviously makes sense. But in another sense, people there are literally left behind by the people around them, same age, maybe they've gone to school together, but a couple of people in those classes, in those school classes, have, they're talented. They can make enough money to move to somewhere like London or Oxford or Cambridge or Reading, or Leeds even, which is relatively rich for the north of England. And the people who can't do that just cannot afford to move to those cities to get better jobs and to make better lives for themselves. And I think understanding this has been a huge eye-opener to me. Like the reason we came to this was like we kept having discussions, my co-authors and I, and we kept kind of talking about all these problems, and they would always reduce down to housing. Like we would talk about fertility collapse, and we would talk about the way birth rates are collapsing kind of all over the world, but especially in developed countries. And we would say it's funny, like it's worse in very apartment-centric countries where it's harder to have kids, where you don't have access to outside space and things like that. We would talk about innovation. We'd say, San Francisco, obviously the most kind of important economic place on earth, but it's a tiny shadow of what it could be if it could grow. And just again and again and again, the problems we were identifying would reduce down to we're not building enough houses in these places.
Okay, what is in this theory? What is the purpose of the house?
The house lets a person move to where the best place for them to live is. So building houses across the country, in our telling, is kind of not that valuable. So we don't actually have a housing shortage in lots of Britain. There are very cheap houses. There are houses that are cheaper to buy than they cost to build in lots of the UK. The problem is that houses in London, especially in the UK, it's kind of London dwarfs everything. It's by far the biggest city. It's by far the most wealthy city. It's by far the most important kind of centre. And that, by the way, that is potentially a problem, but it is what it is for now. And because we stop people from moving to London, because we don't build enough houses in London, and because the houses we do have in London, we don't really allocate very well. We have 40% of inner London is social housing, and half of the people who live
40%?
Yeah, 40% of of housing in inner London is social housing, and of social housing tenants, about 50% of those people are either retired or they don't work for various reasons, they're on benefits, whatever. So 20% of London's housing stock, inner London's housing stock, is economically inactive people in social housing, right? So even of the housing we've got, we're not using it to maximize kind of people's ability to work and produce and set up businesses and things like that. But we also are not building anything. I mean, we built 4,000 homes last year in London compared to like 80,000 was the target in London for last year. We built 4,000. So
basic supply and demand, right?
Yeah, so we're not building. We're not allowing people to move to London. And of the houses we have, we are, I would say, badly misusing them. So we're giving people incredibly valuable homes in central London that could be used by somebody who would live 5 minutes from work or would have access to the greatest labor market in Western Europe. And many of those people, often because they're old and retired, by the way, it's not that all of these people are kind of on benefits and like sitting around all day and could work. A lot of these people are retired. But the question is a house in central London the best place for a retired person? Most retired people in private housing don't choose to live in central London. They move out to, the coast or to the countryside or to the suburbs. But if you're in social housing, it's really difficult to do that. So we misallocate loads of this housing and we don't build enough of it.
So housing itself is a trap in some ways.
In what sense?
Well, it traps you in certain locations. Like if you live where I live in Bedford and you can't afford a house in London, your choices are to go into rented and share a place with people or commute. And if you're commuting, you're getting up at 6, you're getting home at 8, you're tired, you're not going to the gym, you're whatever. But there seems to be like two primary strands here. There is the economic uplift and productivity gains we're missing by people not being able to afford to move in the city, network, build businesses, work. But also, even if you don't want to do that, if you live in Bedford, if you're my son and you live in Bedford and you've got a girlfriend, you can't afford to get on the housing ladder because the interesting stat we looked up, I've talked about this on the show a few times. My dad's first house, the aircraft engineer, was 12 grand. It was a 3-bed detached. I thought it was 4. It was 3-bed detached. That was 3.5 times his wage of 3,500 a year, whatever, about those numbers. My son earns a similar wage now. That same house is 10 times. He cannot get on the ladder. So he and his girlfriend cannot get a house. So the point at which they would naturally choose to marry or have children naturally is delayed. Of course they can have a child in my house, but it's naturally delayed. So I think there is the economic side and then there is the social side.
Absolutely.
Which the social side is also economic,
Yeah.
but I think there's two strands.
Well, exactly, right. This is what I mean when I talk about families.
Yeah.
Right? You know,
Or the housing of everything.
I have 2 young kids, and I waited until I was wealthy enough to live in a house to do that because I wanted to have a garden. I wanted to be able to live in an area where there was a nice nursery nearby and where there was a park nearby. And a lot of people are doing that. You know, a lot of people are waiting until their early or mid 30s, or even later in some cases, when they can afford the sort of home that they want to raise kids in. And I think that's completely fair. Like, I think that's a completely natural thing to do. The problem is, like, it should be possible to do that in your 20s. It should be possible to do that at any age.
Well, but it increases the risk of not being able to have children. We know fertility drops significantly.
Exactly.
I know there's women listening saying, "Shut up, you're a man, you can't talk about this." But we know after 30, it starts to drop significantly.
Right.
It becomes harder and harder to have children as well.
So the harder we make it to have kids, when people, the thing is, this is about when people want to have kids, right? This is a liberal point. Like I think a lot of the conversation about birth rates and things like that can get very muddled because naturally people, especially women, don't want to be told by other people like it's time for you to become a baby machine, right? Like I would not want that, and I think that's a terrible way to think about human beings. The key thing though is that when you ask people when they would like to have kids and how many kids they would like to have, they would like to have kids much younger than they end up having them, generally, on average. And they would like to have more kids on average than they end up having. Because they can't afford it, they don't have the space for them, they have to wait for too long. And housing is a massive, it's not the only part of that, but it's a massive part of that. Interestingly, the baby boom, we often think of the baby boom as post-war, soldiers coming home, everybody's kind of randy and they're having a bunch of kids. Interestingly, though, the baby boom began before the Second World War in some countries, and the baby boom happened in all of the countries that weren't in the Second World War as well. And I think it is much, much more apparent that it was driven by material factors, like improvements in maternal health was a really big one, but also we suddenly started building much, much bigger houses around that time. We just got better at building houses at scale. We could build them more cheaply. We started developing technology to do, essentially the same type of house, but a kind of semi-detached rather than a terrace type house. And I think there's good evidence. We published an article on this in Works in Progress that the housing boom is one of the factors that led to the baby boom. So I'm certainly not saying it's the only factor.
Of course.
But it's an important factor. And if you think about your own life, a lot of the decision making that you make about like when to buy a house or when to move into a house and when to have kids relates to how much space have we got. Unfortunately, we've got the smallest houses in Western Europe in Britain. So we've had a problem for a very long time. It's not a problem of the last 20 years. It's a problem of the last, I would say, 80 years.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, look, we're going to talk about planning. I think it's a really important conversation. But how much of the role has the financialization of property become in this story as well? Because I remember my dad, when I was a kid, my dad could put his money in the building society, get 6-7%. You're lucky if you get 1% these days, and I mean, you don't put money in the bank to get interest. And actually, if you leave money in the bank, you're kind of an idiot because it's a melting ice cube. And so, a lot of people have thought of the second property and the third property as that becoming their kind of investment vehicle for protecting their wealth, but also potentially a pension. Is that part of the problem as well?
So in my opinion, that is the consequence. That is the effect rather than the cause of the problem. The way to think about it, I think, is nobody invests in a fridge. Very rarely do you invest in a car. The only time when it makes sense to invest in a car is when it's a classic car or a kind of limited edition car, where the amount of cars of that type is fixed, where it becomes an investment. It's something that the amount is fixed. You know that supply can't increase. That's when it makes sense to invest in something. Fine art, gold, those are decent investments because you know that it doesn't matter how high the price goes, they're scarce. Housing is like that. Housing is like gold or fine art because the supply is so scarce. The supply is so fixed in Britain. It shouldn't be that way. Housing should be much more like a durable good, like fridges or like normal kind of cars where the price goes up, they make more of them.
It should be subject to the whims of supply and demand.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's only because we've held supply constant, that it's only because supply is fixed, that housing has become this investable asset. Like a house should be a place to live, in my opinion. It should not be the biggest asset that most people own.
So why has this happened? I know we're going to talk about planning, but there's a lot of people who really benefit from having a fixed supply of housing.
I think they benefit in a narrow way, but I think they lose in a broad way. So
Okay.
a homeowner does benefit from the supply being fixed if they bought a long time ago. If they bought before prices rose, then there are a lot of people who are sitting on homes that they bought for a few £1,000s that are now worth, adjusted for inflation, that are still worth 10 times, 20 times what they paid. However, if I'm right that building too few houses has made the economy, is one of the big reasons the economy has stagnated for 20 years, even those people would be better off if we built more houses. If I'm right that economic growth is largely dependent on people being able to move to where the most opportunity is, then fine, the value of your house might not keep rising. The value of your house might go flat. I don't think it's likely, by the way, that we're going to have massive house price drops in nominal terms.
But we are having it here in London right now.
I think it's basically flatlined. The houses or the homes that have fallen are almost always leasehold flats where the deal has become effectively we've imposed a massive tax on leasehold flats, houses, terraced houses, things like that in London. They've been fairly flat in nominal terms, and I think that's driven by interest rates rising. There's less mortgage money chasing them. So I mean, there are kind of certainly fluctuations in nominal terms, and don't hold me, this is an investment advice, don't hold me to any kind of suggestion that houses can never fall or anything like that. But I don't think it's likely that we will ever get the sort of house building, the kind of explosion of house building that you would need for a massive crash in house building just driven by extra supply. So I think really what we're talking about is, do we want house prices to continue going up forever, or are we comfortable with house prices staying flat in nominal terms and hopefully falling in real terms? Well, I think the latter is really attractive.
I think the latter is really attractive if there's somewhere to put your money.
Yeah.
I mean, if we still live in an inflationary environment, and your choice is, what are your choices? You can put it into gold, perhaps, or you can put it in fine art, as you said, which a lot of people don't really understand. I think
stocks and shares is what I put my money into.
Well, stocks and shares, but I mean, the stock market itself, the majority of the gains are inflationary as well. So it's
I'm not sure about that. I mean, adjusted for inflation, the returns to an all-world index fund or a S&P 500 index fund, it's definitely outperformed inflation over the last 10, 20, 50 years.
But has it always matched productivity?
No, but I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it will match productivity.
It's still kind of Ponzi.
I don't agree with that.
You don't think the stock market's a little bit Ponzi?
No.
See, I think it is, and I think mainly driven by the US, because I think there's a geopolitical risk to the stock market not growing, which is why during COVID, the stock market grew despite companies failing. And I think the stock market has to grow also just because their 401ks, the stock market has to keep growing. That's a whole other conversation. But
I think a lot about this, by the way. I'm
you
really
probably know more than me.
No, I don't mean, sorry, I don't mean that. I'm not saying that. I mean, what I mean is I'm really interested in this. I think this is such an interesting topic. And from a kind of personal finance perspective, I mean, although I think Martin Lewis is good in some ways, and I like using the Money Saving Expert website sometimes to find a cheap credit card, or a cheaper mortgage, I do think that there has been a massive miss in this country compared to the US, in that the most trusted people on personal finance and savings, like Martin Lewis, have not given people the advice that putting your money into a stocks and shares ISA and putting it into a broad index fund, not buying individual companies, but just a broad, buy the market, is, in my opinion, a very good way to save your money. And I think that, if you look at the US, where there is a huge amount of that kind of saving, as you say, savers in the US, I think, have done so much better thanks to that, compared to people here who've kept their money in cash and had it inflated away.
You calling out Martin Lewis? National treasure.
I think he's a good guy. I actually suspect that the reason that he hasn't done it is regulatory. So I don't think that it's. So I'm not actually attacking him, but I'm attacking what I see as he isn't advising people. They've just about started to say maybe you should do this. But I think the risk is, as everybody always says, I'm not giving investment advice. I think that the regulatory system set up to protect people from bad advice, which kind of, there's probably something to that, has also caught a lot of fairly good, fairly anodyne advice that would just say, hey, A cash ISA is going to be inflated away. You are losing money every year if you put money into a cash ISA. Inflation is gonna kill you.
Well, I feel the same about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I think we scared people away from Bitcoin,
Sure.
and people have had the opportunity. But we should stay on housing. I want to ask one more question, then we'll get into planning. What role does stamp duty play in this? Because my last house, the stamp duty ate up the majority of the income the wealth I'd gained through my previous property. I bought what I thought was my final home. I love this house. My neighbour has a better house. I love his house. It's a bit bigger. It's got a nice garden. Mine's a bit small. He's moving. Okay, and the only reason I'm not buying his house is stamp duty, because it's going to essentially leave me with no equity again. And I only moved 3 years ago. And so I essentially need to live in this house 10 to 15 years to make it worthwhile. Whereas if there was no stamp duty, say there was a property tax that worked out, I don't know, what would be fair, 15, 20 years equivalent of stamp duty?
Yeah.
My calculation is how much does my property tax go up? Oh, it's going up £1,000 a year, £2,000 a year. Great. I'll buy your house. I'll move in. I don't like your kitchen. I'll put a new kitchen in. And, there's an economic uplift to me moving. I'm purely not buying his house because of stamp duty. It's the only reason. And that's a real true story.
I completely agree with you. And I should declare my interest because I'm actually in a pretty similar situation to you.
It's bullshit, isn't it?
Yeah. And so I think stamp duty is the worst tax we've got. Right? Okay. I think we've got a lot of bad taxes, but I think stamp duty is the worst. And I'm not just saying that because I am right now looking down the barrel of a very high stamp duty bill. The problem is, as you're saying, it locks you in to where you are. So, I mean, there are two factors here when we talk about housing. One is how much we're building and where we're building it. And the other is how easy it is to move around, how easy it is to say, I want to take a job in Oxford, right? I want to take a job in Cambridge. The biotech sector is booming. I want to move there, move my family there. Am I going to have to pay a £100,000 stamp duty bill as I would if I had to buy a, let's say, £1.4 million house? The problem has become much, much, much worse in the last 10 or 15 years here. So this is somewhere where things have just gotten incredibly worse for two reasons. One is stamp duty is obviously a tax on the value of the house, and nominal values have gone up, and stamp duty is not done in real terms, it's done in nominal terms.
Yep.
So, house price inflation just increases your stamp duty bill. And George Osborne reformed the stamp duty system, fixed it in some ways. There was a mad system where, you had this slab system where, if the house was 499k, you'd pay a 5% rate or something. And then if it becomes 500k, you pay a 7% rate on the entire value, right? So you have this crazy bunching at all of these cliff edges. It was good to get rid of that, but the way that he paid for it was by making the top of the market really, really, really progressive, like really high rates on the top of the market. And unfortunately, that is the London market. Unfortunately, most family homes within, zone 3 are £1 million or more if they're more than 2 bedrooms. So that's meant that the most important housing market in the country, where you live is a huge determinant of what jobs you can access, because most people don't want to commute for an hour. Even if they live in sort of central-ish London, you can be looking at that kind of commute if you're going from one side to the other. So we've locked in massive amounts of people into these houses via this crazy tax. And the thing is, stamp duty doesn't even raise that much money.
It
raises in the order of about £15 billion, which is a lot of money, but in the scale of income tax, value-added tax, national insurance contributions,
1.2 trillion they spend a year.
Yeah, there is a massive win, and you've already mentioned it, by moving into a property tax. But only levying the property tax when somebody moves. So nobody pays the property tax right now, but if you move, that's when you move in, and you do it instead of paying stamp duty. I think that would be, everybody would choose that. Like,
oh my God, I would be moving house next week.
Yeah, people would be absolutely thrilled. It would be one of the most popular tax rises in history, because we would be getting rid of the worst and by the way, most unpopular tax we've got. I mean, inheritance tax and stamp duty are the two most unpopular taxes in Britain. Moving into a property tax like this, where you pay, £1,000, a couple of £1,000 every year over the course of, as you say, 10, 15, 20 years, you probably end up paying more than the stamp duty, or you at a certain point you pay more. That's fine. I would be very happy to avoid this huge chunk of payment right now.
Well, because some people can't even find it.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's what, and because it comes out of the deposit as well. That's the other. It's mortgage lending doesn't allow you to borrow to cover the stamp duty. It's a really, really unfortunate system. And to me, it's easy to sit around and say like, I'd get rid of this tax, I'd get rid of that tax. But to me, number one priority of any government, whatever stripe they are, Labour, left, whatever, is fix stamp duty, get rid of it, replace it with a property tax.
You listening, Andy Burnham? I don't know if he listens. I doubt he listens to the show. Andy Burnham, get rid of it. No, I know, and I know other people. I mean, look, there's two people here straight away. Kurt, same stamp duty.
What was the question?
Stamp duty prohibitive.
Yeah, it's mental.
Everyone. It's for everyone. Unless you're buying your first house. They've done a good job there. But it's so prohibitive and it's so stupid because, again, it misses that economic uplift when you move to a new house and you put a new kitchen in or you get a new lawnmower, all the stuff you do when you buy a new house. The movers come in, the painters, the decorators. It's just... Yeah.
Okay. And the more fixed the supply of housing is, the more important this is.
Yes.
If we've got a essentially fixed number of houses in London, it's really important that we use them the right way and that we make sure that the person who values that house the most is the person who can live in that house.
Okay, so you guys know that I'm not just an equities guy. I'm a Bitcoin guy too. And for people like me, just holding Bitcoin has been the winning strategy. But for others, they like a little diversification. Whatever the strategy, each cycle, I'm always like, I wish I knew how to trade this. I just never try because I'm not a trader and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So this is where Arch Public comes in. They can help you implement a custom strategy that works for you. Because if you've held Bitcoin or Salesforce stock over the last year, man, you have taken every drawdown on the chin, but you can make that volatility work for you. They built a platform that automates layered trading strategies across stocks, ETFs, Bitcoin and commodities, handling buying, selling, profit-taking and accumulation all directly in your own exchange account. So when they asked to sponsor the pod, I said I have to see this first. And they introduced me to their Market Way product, where you can customize buys and sells based on the triggers, risk profile and timescales that work for you. And that is what I've done. Now listen, I'm not telling you to go and blindly ape in, but if you're looking to protect your downside and make volatility work for you, give them a call. Ask to see every trade and make them prove the math. So if you're trying to accumulate smarter, take profits, use volatility or tax loss harvests alongside your CPA, take a look at Arch Public by heading over to archpublic.com/Peter. That's archpublic.com/Peter. Okay, let's talk about why we're not building houses then. I'm assuming a lot of this is coming down to planning.
A lot of it is planning, not all of it. But
okay.
The planning system is the system that says, can you build this or not? Are you allowed to build here? And if so, like, what are you allowed to build? I think some planning system makes sense. I think at a local level, people it's reasonable to say, I want to move into a suburb and I want to have some expectation. For example, most people would agree that like you shouldn't be able to build a meat processing plant in the middle of a residential suburb.
Yeah, that's
like,
fair.
That's fair, right? I think that having some kind of expectation, some kind of like mutual agreement with your neighbors that, I'm not going to build a skyscraper here. That makes sense. Historically, we had a planning system up until the Attlee government in the 1940s. But when the local council would stop you from building something, they would have to compensate you for the fact that they had stopped you from using your land in a particular way. So what that meant, incentives, exactly. What that meant was they used those powers very sparingly. They used them only in the most egregious situations, like building a meat processing plant in the middle of a suburb, whatever. But they didn't just go crazy.
But hold on, could you grift that? Could you come up with an idea for your land that you knew that wouldn't be approved to be compensated?
I assume there would have to be some kind of like. I assume there would have to. I don't actually know the mechanics of that, but I assume there would be some kind of check to see whether you were actually going to do it, whether you had the money, whether you had the plans.
But the line was more pro-build.
It was the key thing was that they bore the costs of stopping you. I used to be under the impression that there wasn't a planning system before the 1940s, and I think most people are under that impression. The thing that I discovered researching this a few years ago was that we had this planning system, but it built in incentives to the system, and it worked very well. We have never built more houses than we built in the 1930s. It was almost entirely private sector building. If we were building at that rate today, adjusted for population, we'd be building about 4 times as many houses as we're building right now.
Wow.
It's absolutely crazy. And this, I mean, actually, the 1930s build, I don't want to go too deep into the history, but the 1930s explosion in building we had is one of the reasons that we were able to avoid the Great Depression, and we were able to rearm, and we were able to stand up and fight Germany and actually kind of see them down. The amount of economic activity, the boom that took place in Britain in the 1930s, while the rest of the world was on its knees, is really interesting, really underrated. It's when we developed the first national grid in the world. It's when we did so much at that period because we had this very, very, very permissive approach to building. Not entirely permissive, but very permissive. So today, the planning system by default says you may not build anything anywhere.
Yes.
The standard rule is you may not build anything anywhere. And you have to go through an incredibly expensive and incredibly slow and incredibly uncertain process of begging permission from your local authority to build. And even then, sometimes you can't even get that. So we have green belts around cities where you just cannot get permission to build.
There's a lot of economic waste in there as well. So we're trying to we want to build a football stadium for my football club.
Yeah.
The stadium we want to build would capacity about 5,000-6,000. Will cost about the same as the one Milton Keynes Dons built 20-ish years ago. Theirs is a 30,000 seater stadium. And the reason is, there's multiple reasons, things we've talked about. There's been massive construction inflation, but the planning is very expensive, and the consultants we have to use to get through the planning and the money we have to spend to get through the planning will take longer than the construction of the stadium.
I mean,
how is that so?
Doesn't surprise me, but it does appall me, you know?
Yeah.
That we'll get onto infrastructure in a little bit, but the planning system doesn't just apply to houses. It applies to railways. It applies to tunnels. So there's a project called the Lower Thames Crossing, which is a plan to build a tunnel between Essex and Kent. And this would link up the 2 biggest seaports that we've got. So you could have just much more efficient haulage between them, so on. So this has not begun work yet. But so far, they've had to produce a planning application that runs to 360,000 pages. And the 360,000 pages
of what?
And the production of the production of this planning document has cost £297 million. And to put that in perspective, the world's longest road tunnel is in Norway and was built. The entire project cost less than the planning application for this tunnel.
Well, look, there are a lot of people who benefit from these planning taking a long time and these consultancy fees to do it. And I'm very suspicious of that as well.
Well, I think this is a reason I'm pretty suspicious of the house builders. I think that the house builders exist to serve the market that we have allowed to emerge. So really the only kind of house building that happens at scale in this country is on greenfield, is taking a field, building a new housing estate on that field and, selling it. That's fine. I don't object to that. I like those are good places to live in some cases, and it's pretty obvious why you would want to build a lot of those types of homes. But the problem is the type of building and the type of business model that makes that works for that has no real application in cities and in densifying and intensifying the use of cities. So what I often find is that governments come in, both Conservative and Labour. They had this intention to fix house building. They talk to the house builders, and the house builders say, "No, don't worry about densifying London. Don't worry about building more homes on brownfield in London. Just focus on releasing land around on the very, very far edge outskirts." And I don't think it's corruption, but I think it's
incentives.
Yeah, I think it's incentives, and I think this is a huge problem. This is a kind of form of corporatism where government kind of thinks it wants to act in the interest of the market, talks to the big players in the market who say, just do this. Don't bother with a big liberalization. We won't profit from that. And maybe some of our competitors will come in, or maybe new entrants will come in and compete with us. We're not that interested. That's a waste of time. Just focus on land release. To me, the really big win in fixing planning is making it much easier to build within cities, taking advantage of existing infrastructure, intensifying land use, building on, behind where I live, there's a car park and it's basically empty. None of the people, we all live about 10 minutes away from the tube. Nobody has a car. I mean, there are like 3 cars in this car park. And this has been a recurring thing. I live in a reasonably central part of London. I don't have an objection to cars. I think cars are great. I think cars are awesome. But for a lot of people at that point in their lives, it doesn't make sense to have a car. Yet London is just peppered with these empty car parks that would be for everybody better off if we could build on them. The whole area would be better. You would have more people there. You'd have more services. You'd have more demand for shops and things like that. And I think that the really big win is intensifying that kind of land use. And unfortunately, the even kind of well-intentioned government efforts to fix planning almost always overlook this.
Well, I mean, it almost gets to the root of the problem for so many issues in this country, where we have this kind of managerial class who are overseeing a kind of butchered set of incentives which don't actually lead to the right kind of economic outcomes. And like, you can point to any part of this. I think this country is grinding to a halt. And to me, I always think a lot of this is downstream of government. Like in the free market, we would build houses. We would just build houses. Right. A few more people might die, but we'll build more houses. Okay, so there's a role in the government to maybe having some regulations in place so, the houses don't collapse and, we have proper connected sewer and electric. I get all that. But all across society, I just see things breaking down and the incentive structures are all wrong. Maybe it just comes down to what you said earlier on, that we don't have this federal system, so we don't have the competition.
Yeah. That's kind of what I mean. The reason that I wouldn't say I'm excited about local government. That makes me sound like the most boring person on the planet. But I do think that one of the ways out of this is to give local governments incentive, local councils, local authorities, whatever, give them tax benefits from building in their areas. Because right now, something being built near you is basically just a loss for you. Like, you are worse off. You get nothing from it. Maybe there's more congestion on the roads. Maybe it's being built on a field that you used to walk through or used to walk around, whatever. There is basically nothing in it for you. The tax that we raise from businesses and from homes and things like that all goes into a central pot in Westminster and then is redistributed outwards according to need. There's no real benefit to you. And I think a lot of the way that we begin to unpick this problem is allow local governments to benefit, to retain much, much more, if not all of the tax of the things that are built in their area, so that, your area, okay, fine, you might not want the field near you to have a new housing estate on it, but that's going to pay for revitalizing the town centre. That's going to pay for fixing all the potholes on the roads. Maybe that will pay for a big council tax cut for you.
This is a massive change, though.
Yeah.
I think it's something like 96% of all tax revenue goes through Whitehall. I think in Switzerland, it's, I want to say 40%, or it's 40% goes locally. It's 96%. Our councils are broke.
Yeah.
They're unable to, the problem we talked about earlier of the quality of people in Whitehall, you want to compare it down at local government.
Yeah.
Sorry, anyone who works in Bedford Council, there's some good people there, but I've also met some absolute morons. I just don't understand how they're in these roles.
And we've also lumbered local authorities with like crazy responsibilities, social care.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how does it make sense for a council that happens to have more old people than another council having to spend huge amounts more money on caring for those old people? Like, that's completely crazy. And it means that, like, right now, any money that your local council gets will go into probably social care and or provision of special needs education, again, which I don't think makes sense for local authorities to give. To me, local authorities should be like corporations whose job it is to maximize the value and the quality of that area. That's what their job should be. And they should be accountable to local residents, local landowners, local whatever, homeowners. They every year, the only thing they should be saying is, have we made this area a nicer place to live in, a better place to set up a business? Have we increased economic dynamism? Have we made this a better place to live? And if you don't like it, you can A, vote us out, or you can B, move to another area that has a different set of policies that's competing with us.
That's the root of the problem with town centres.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you've looked at that as well, but I mean, just crazy things. Guy I know has got a cafe in Bedford, and he wanted to put chairs and tables outside. Took months to get a license for tables and chairs. The place next to him has tables and chairs outside.
Yeah.
I spoke to the council. I talked to them quite regularly, and I was looking at what they did in Greece after their austerity. And they had, was it Friday night? It's in Athens.
Oh, yeah.
Whereby on every Friday night they pedestrianise the streets, they let everyone have late licenses, and they just almost had like a festival party atmosphere, and everyone came out and spent money. I talked about this with my local council. I said, we should pedestrianise the high street every Friday night. We should allow street vendors, chairs, tables outside, get people playing guitars, just get the town centre rocking. Well, to close down the high street, we'd have to put an application. I think the first one we can do would be next Easter. It was a 9-month period. I was like, what do you want about next Easter? Why can't we do it on Friday or next Friday?
Yeah.
In 2 weeks. Getting things done is so difficult in this country if it touches the state.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
I think we're grinding to halt as a country. You're optimistic. I'm optimistic if the people are released. If we release the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
If we give a reason for investors to invest. I think we're so far from that. I think we get worse at.
I think I would say I'm probably a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. I think it's important to remember just how great Britain is. Like, I say this as a person. I moved here from Ireland in 2009, so I've been here for 17 years. I really love Ireland, but England especially, but Britain generally, has such an amazing inheritance.
Yeah.
It has some of the best cities in the world. It has some of the most important institutions, the Royal Society. It has traditions of science. It has like cultures of debate. It has, people here love arguing, but in a friendly way that's about discovering what's true, which is really rare. Even in rich, developed countries, conformism, kind of intellectual conformism, is pretty common. I think it's much less common here. And we have, the rule of law. We have really low corruption in our political system. Much less than even some English-speaking countries. Like the English-speaking world is really good on corruption, but Britain is among the best. We have a pretty, I don't think that the quality of people in politics is that good, but I think we have a remarkably durable and kind of trustworthy political system over the past century compared to.
I don't think now.
Maybe not. Maybe that's getting worse. But my point is that the things that you cannot legislate for, we have
the ingredients
really, really well. Most countries would die for some of the things that we've got here, culturally, historically, even economically. What we've got wrong are things that we could fix. You and I could fix in 6 months.
Let's start a party.
Yeah.
No, but look, I agree with you. To me, it's just common sense. For me, as somebody as a business operator, somebody reads a little, listens to podcasts and tries to educate himself. I see the problems. I see how to fix them. But we can't seem to get ourselves to the point where we have some form of political leadership that is able to do it. And maybe it comes back to what you said. After a period of inflation, we have political extremism, which we have now. We have insurgent parties. The Greens are an insurgent party. Reform and even Restore now out there who are getting large parts of the vote. But we see it. You and I see this. But I don't hear any politicians really talking in these terms.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, if I had a political party, I'd be calling you, I'd be calling Catherine, what's her name? So bad. Catherine Porter on energy.
Yeah.
All these people who understand. I mean, we had it the other day where Andy Burnham announced all his new cabinet appointees. Not one had any experience in the department they're in.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, right. Housing. I really need Sam Bowman in. Like, he understands housing. He's done the study. Sam, come in. You're going to run housing. I really saw that energy. Sorry, Edmund Abanja, ways off anyway. Let's get in Catherine Porter. Like, I would get these people in. I would get these people to understand. It's how do we, to me, that's the answer. How do we get those roles filled by people who understand it and aren't playing the greasy polar politics? How do we do that? And then how do we tell that story to the public? Yeah, I'm not, I mean, I hate tax, of course. But
I hadn't noticed.
Well, no, I don't mind tax. What I hate is tax increases which piss the money away.
Yeah.
But if somebody came to me with a plan and said, look, Pete, you've done pretty well over the last few years. You own property, you own such and such. The country, we're on a war footing here. We need to turn around. The only way we can do this is, we need a little bit more tax from the wealthiest in the country. But what we're going to do with this, we've got Sam Bowman, and he's going to... Is it Bowman or Bowman?
Bowman.
Sorry, I keep calling you Bowman. Fine. Sam Bowman in, and he's going to be running housing. This is his plan. And we've got Catherine, and this is his plan. We've got experts, Shankar Singham in on economics. This is the plan. It's going to be hard work. We're going to have to take a couple of steps backwards to go 3 steps forward, but this is our plan. I was like, I'd vote for that. I would. That's the environment I'd vote for a tax rise. I'm not voting for a tax rise in Gary economics world where it's just like, well, we just need to tax more because they'll piss it away.
Yeah. I also think that while I am frustrated by the overall burden of tax, I am most frustrated by really damaging taxes like stamp duty
Yes.
that don't raise that much money in the grand scheme of things and hugely affect the decisions I have to make in life. Like, it's those really narrow-based taxes that distort activity. It's those really narrow taxes that distort your life, that make you lead you to making weeks and weeks of deliberation over whether you'll do this or not. And, in your case, not buying a house that you would have bought.
Or considering leaving the country.
Yeah.
I mean, you like me must know people who've moved to Portugal. And
Loads.
Italy
I mean,
and
America,
stuff.
for me, I like
America, yeah.
tons of people I know.
We were out of the World Cup. We met these two after the Congo game. We met these two lads who were in the bar who moved out to America with their wives. Actually, two great characters who both were had working wives who were very successful, and they played golf all the time. Great life. But they were telling us America is set up for you to be successful. They said, we live here in Florida, our tax rate, we've got no state tax, so we take home more. And I was looking up the tax rates last night because LA is seen as the expensive.
Yeah,
California is really expensive on tax. If you earn £1 million a year, you'll pay £50,000 a year less tax living in LA than you would here in the UK.
Wow.
Yeah, so your take home in the UK is around 541, I think it was, 541,000. So you're essentially losing 45%. In LA, it's about 588,000. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I thought LA was terrible.
And they have lower employer side taxes. Their payroll taxes in California and the US are lower than they are here. So you're more likely to earn that kind of amount. Like your employers will be able to offer you that. So it's probably even bigger than you're suggesting.
That's why they grow more.
Yeah.
But that's the state. That is a blue state where they tend to have higher taxes. You go to the red states where they don't have a state tax, you could be taking home 650,000, 670,000. I think Colorado was one of the best.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh. And so anyway, they explained. They said, we've got more money to spend, so we spend more. Okay. But he said, secondly, that it's set up in other ways. Like, for example, you got your 401k. You can borrow. Someone might correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure he said you can borrow from your 401k as long as you pay it back by the end of the year. So if you want to get a boat or a car at the start of the year, you borrow it from your 401k. You just got to put the money back by the end of the year. And he said, so you're giving less away as interest, and you're making that active choice. He said, everything here is set up for you. It's for the economy to motor. I felt like everything in our economy is set up to slow you down. It's like rocks on your back. We're not a productive economy. We're very slow, and I find it frustrating.
I'm totally with you on that. I think on the question of like how does it change?
Yeah.
Energies, I mean, you mentioned Catherine Porter. Energy is a pretty interesting example, I think, because 10 years ago, there was no disagreement about renewable energy. There was no disagreement about what we now call net zero. There was no disagreement that we needed to do all of this. This was an emergency, that it didn't matter. At any cost, we should build gigantic amounts of offshore wind and things like that. The amount of change that's happened, both in the public debate, both in the minds of voters, in the minds of pretty much everybody except the Department of Energy. They're like the last holdouts, and Ed Miliband, Miata Fanbula, the new energy secretary, they are really the last holdouts. Even within the Labour government, they are in a minority position that thinks we shouldn't be drilling the North Sea and so on. And I think that the swiftness of the change on that has been really, really remarkable and encouraging, because it makes me think that people are much more open-minded than we usually think, and people's views about these things are much more prone to change if the facts become clear. Like, it's just become clear in the last few years that we have made huge mistakes on energy. By the way, to be clear, I was always against renewable energy. I was publishing papers 15 years ago about wind power and the problems that it's had. So there have been holdouts there, and there've been people much better informed than me saying this throughout this period. But the center of gravity, like the window of debate, has shifted so dramatically in such a short space of time. I think that's really encouraging.
Well, it's because people were insulated from the problems. But we have a middle class now, certainly a lower middle class, who is not feeling like they're really a middle class anymore. We've had the wage compression from the minimum wage, so that's a problem. And the general cost of living going up, but wage stagnating. I think these are all problems where, luxury beliefs and luxury voting for more left-wing ideas, and we can give everything away for free. It's starting to hit them now. Inflation is bit. And I think people are starting to go, well, why is my energy so high? Why is my shopping so high? I can't afford a new car. I can't afford a foreign holiday this year. Okay, fuck, this is too expensive. I think we've been very fortunate. We had a great interview the other day. We had Professor Charles Goodhart.
Oh yeah,
89 years old.
Yeah, amazing man. Yeah,
it's so funny. You go in the comments and people are so. It's like, guys, he's 89 years old. Like, give him a break. But he was basically saying we don't really understand how lucky we were to live in the last few decades, in that we've lived in a glorious period. We've been able to export a lot of production out to cheaper markets, China and such. He said, this is ending now. Like, we cannot afford what we had before. Huge inflation is coming. We have to change the way we do things, which I think is entirely right. I think he's entirely, absolutely right. But it's not going to. I think because of that, voters are feeling the pinch. When you feel the pinch, you maybe go, was that really a smart idea? Did I really want to support that government? Did I really want to support that economic idea? I think one of the parts of democracy that needs to change is people need to not be insulated from the decisions they make. And I'll give you a great example. I live in Bedford. I get hammered for this, for calling the town centre a shithole. It is a shithole. It is noodle shops. It is vapes shops. It is lots of cafes, of which I have one. It's crap. And it used to be beautiful, but it's crap. And it doesn't attract the wealthier people in now. They go to breweries on the edge of the town, or they go to village pubs, and they go to retail parks. So that's the money in the retail parks is quite interesting. That's been invested in. But anyway, we've killed the reasons to come into that town centre. And my partner was in London the other week. She was in Primrose Hill, and she was taking photos and going, this place is so beautiful. Look at it. I was like, yeah. Do you know why? Do you know why that's beautiful? It's because they're insulated from what they voted for. These are the people who are voting for Bedford Town Centre to be a shithole. These are the people voting for it. So I think we need to make people bear the consequences of what they vote for more directly. I don't know how.
I agree. Actually, so it's funny you mentioned retail parks.
Yes.
And it's funny you mentioned, I haven't been to Bedford, so I can't comment on whether it's a shithole or not. But one of the big problems we've got is we used to have essentially a single landowner for places for town centres. There would be one duke or whatever. We're in London, and it would be the Duke of Shaftesbury or the Duke of Westminster who was the landowner. And to some extent in London it still is. And the benefit of having one landowner is that the positive spillovers from having a park or cleaning the streets well, or having nice signage, would be captured by the landowner, because any individual shop owner wouldn't capture the benefits of having a beautiful shop front, but all of the shops around them would benefit and rents would go up. One of the consequences of a lot of that land being sold off, and we now have very fragmented land ownership, especially in most of our town centres, is that you bear none of the costs that you impose on the area around you as a shop owner. So you get betting shops that, probably make a decent amount of money, but make the whole area less pleasant to be in. People complain about vape shops. Personally, I don't care about vape shops. I don't vape, but I don't see why people care about them. But people don't like them. You get far fewer of the kind of shops, anchor shops, that by themselves don't make that much money, but make the area desirable to go to.
And collectively.
And I don't think we can go back to having a single landowner in these places. It would be really hard to reassemble that land. But I do think that if local government worked, it could replicate some of if it had the right incentives, if it had tax incentives, if it was bringing those tax rewards back to voters or back to the businesses in those areas, then it could function to capture some of those spillovers and apply them better. The problem is it's just broken. It doesn't have any incentives to do that. The people there they're probably not thinking in that way because they don't have any incentive to. It's funny, you mentioned the Andy Burnham business rates tax cut. Kind of the tax purist in me sort of winces whenever you give any particular business a special tax break, because it sort of functions like a subsidy. It's not to say that it is a subsidy, but it kind of functions like one.
Yeah, you're right.
Like charity shops don't pay business rates.
Yes.
And are we surprised that they can then outbid everybody else for these like prime high street positions?
Yeah, 5, 6, 7 on Bedford High Street.
Right. Which is
They're proving the model works.
which is a huge problem, right?
But there's signal there.
Yeah.
There's a signal there that there is lots of charity shops that are able to function and operate
Yeah.
because they have a better incentive structure.
Yeah, right. And so I think it's crazy that Andy Burnham has spent the last however many years talking about devolution. And then like day one, the policy he announces is nationally, we're going to cut business rates for these particular businesses. What I would really support is if he had said, we're going to let local authorities have the power to say, you know what, we actually think Bedford Town Centre would be better off if we had slightly higher business rates tax bills for charity shops.
Yeah, but a lot of that business rates money goes back into central government.
Right. Exactly.
And they actually raise the rates. So they do this crazy thing where they rebalance the rates.
Yeah.
So once you get hit a certain rate, I can't remember the actual detail, once you hit a certain thing, they force you to raise the rates because you've hit the new balance.
Yeah.
I personally, if I was Andy Burnham, the first decision I'd have made every town centre a zone of economic opportunity, and I would have removed business rates in every town centre.
I would have given every local authority the power to do that.
Same.
Yeah.
As long as we get there.
Yeah. But it's not doing it from the centre. That's the key thing in my mind.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I agree with you on decentralization.
Yeah.
I'm a Bitcoiner. I like
Yeah.
decentralization. I agree with you on that. There is another issue with town centres, and it comes back to housing as well, that we should discuss. So there's a couple of things that I think are really destructive, and I understand why people want them in place. But every time you force a builder to make 30% social housing within a thing is utterly destructive.
Yeah.
We've got this tower block in Bedford. It was the old BT building there. It got converted into flats. 30%, I think it's actually like the first 3 floors are all social housing. This place is an absolute shithole. You get there, it's crackheads there, drug dealers. The carpets have been ripped up on 2 of the floors. The elevators don't work. There's rats. There's everything. Now, I think sometimes to fix problems, we have to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. Not everyone in society is going to operate the same. There are some people who are just near the bottom rungs who aren't going to mix well with other people, aren't going to care about their neighbors and care about where they live. That is just a reality. Sure. But when you put 30% into this block, you've actually destroyed the whole block. The people there cannot even sell their properties now. And I know because I got involved in contacting the police, the fire, and everyone to go and deal with it because it was a nightmare. You've also got the HMOs in town. Another problem in Bedford, we've got a prison, and it's a remand prison, and they just throw prisoners onto the street. So the town centre not only has the economic issues, it has the social issues in that there's crackheads, alcoholics, all plaguing the town centre, robbing from the stores as well. So yes, we should solve the economic side of things, but we also need to solve the social culture issues of the town. It's a huge problem.
Social housing is, so earlier we were talking about planning, and I said planning's a big part of it, but it's not the only part. Social housing, I think, is the other really big factor that makes it really hard to build. Because we're saying now for new developments in some places, half of what you build has to be basically given away as social housing. It's a gigantic tax on new building. Even if you wanted to build, I don't think it's a good idea for the state to build social housing. I don't think social housing for full stop is a good idea. But let's say we thought it was a good idea. What a crazy thing to say that we're going to levy the tax for this specifically on new homes. Like the one thing that we want more of. We're going to levy this huge tax on new developments. It's totally, totally mad.
Can I ask a question on that? Do you think that essentially what is a tax is what's led to a lower quality of building the houses as well?
Yeah. I think that people have a budget constraint. People have a certain amount of money they can spend on a new home. The more you push up the cost of building new homes, something else has got to give. So you have to compromise on
inner walls.
Quality. Yeah, you have to compromise on quality. You have to compromise on size. We have, as I was saying, we have the smallest homes in Western Europe. We have an incredibly poor housing stock. Like the housing stock pre-1945 is great. And we're like one of the only places where the older the home is, the more valuable it is. Like it's a really, really bad sign when new homes are being sold at a discount relative to homes that were built 100 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a sign that something has gone wrong with what you are allowed to build and how you can build it. But social housing is also a big problem in that a lot of the people who live in social housing, because they're economically inactive, they are occupying really, really, really valuable units that could be occupied by a young professional, by a young family, by people who could really boost their incomes and boost overall productivity, pay taxes, and so on. And the person in that social housing is worse off because they would probably be better off somewhere quieter, somewhere in the country. If they're not economically active because, let's say, they're retired or they have a disability or whatever it is, those people would be better off and would be happier if they could live somewhere other than a central, prosperous city.
And maybe we're making things too easy for some. Look, not everyone has the same motivation.
Sure.
Not everyone gets up at 6 a.m. and works a 12-hour day. Some people don't want to work. Some people just don't want to do anything. And if we provide them with everything, you're going to have people who are going to go, okay, I'm going to take all that. I'm not going to do shit. We have to incentivize people. A little bit of them. I'm not callous. I think we should have a society that looks after the most vulnerable, but I don't think we should allow people to just state themselves as vulnerable and just provide for them. It's not fair that somebody gets up at work at 5 a.m. and it's going out and doing the roads or any job, and they're increasingly getting squeezed for the people who just don't want to do shit.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the earned income tax credit in America,
okay,
which basically is a top up to your wage if you work essentially a full-time job. It might be a lowly.
Is that like a working tax credit? We have here,
yeah. So it might be the requirements are greater. So there are like minimum hours that you have to work to get it. So basically, the point is, if you want to get this top up, then you need to work a full-time job. It might not be a well-paid job. You might not want to do the job, but do a job, and we will
join the system.
Yeah, join the system. And I think that is a really, really good way of, I want to support people on low incomes, right? I really don't, I think, I like you, I am not callous. I think it's really, really important. I think that we all have compassion towards our countrymen, towards the people that we see every day and who are trying their best and who are less lucky than we are and so on. Like, I think it's really important to make sure that those people, and the people, especially with kids, aren't left in really, really squalid conditions. And I think the quid pro quo for that is you make an effort, you work, we will top up your wages, but we're going to make it really hard for you not to work. And if you don't work, we're going to be absolutely sure that you can't work. And I think there's a huge problem that we have with the welfare system that COVID made it much worse because we don't do in-person assessments anymore. We have a very, very easily gameable system for getting benefits. Like, you can go online now and basically there are magic words. If you say these magic words in your assessment, they have to qualify you as disabled. We have moved to, I think, a well-intentioned but mistaken thing called the parity of esteem between mental health issues and physical health issues. And you can see where that's coming from. Sometimes mental health issues are really, really bad, but it's also much easier to exaggerate or claim that you have a mental health related disability.
You might even convince yourself of that.
You might even convince yourself to, exactly. And I think that was a big mistake. I think all of these things are big mistakes. We've given ourselves a really gameable system and we've made it really easy to opt out of the job market and opt out of the life that I think most people should be doing.
All right, let's talk to you about my sponsor, Ledden. Now, if you're borrowing against your Bitcoin, there's one thing that matters more than anything else. Is it actually safe? Well, Ledden have just dropped their lowest rates ever, but more importantly, they haven't changed the thing that matters most. Your Bitcoin is never lent out. So they're not chasing yield, there's no hidden risk, and there's no rehypothecation. Just collateralized loans done properly. Now, they've done over $10 billion in loans, and they've done this through bull markets, through bear markets, and everything in between. And they've done it without ever losing any client assets. So now you get lower rates, which means the bigger the loan, the lower the rate, and full transparency before you apply. There's no monthly payments or early repayment penalties, and they give you tools to stay in control, from auto top-ups to LTV alerts. So you're not choosing between a good rate and safety anymore, because with Ledden you get both. Now, you can check out your rate using the calculator at ledden.io/Peter. I'll tell you another interesting thing on social housing. So I spoke to the police about this. And they said the 30% rule sounds like it's higher now.
Yeah.
He said that's been a real problem for policing. He said, as much as people dislike it, ghetto policing is a lot easier for us than what we have now, because we would know where the main problems are. We would know who the problem people are. We know how to deal with it. He said, we're just spread so thin because there's so much travel distance now. We have to go and deal with issues. And so I thought that was really interesting. You do have to get to that, there's going to be some people in those ghettoized areas who want to get out. And I think we need to build a society that gives them the opportunity to get out and help other people. But so many own goals. Can we talk about this Vetocracy?
Yeah.
Because I think this is really interesting because, again, I think this gets to the root of the problem. Is this kind of like the thesis of the managerial class?
Yeah.
Or Liz Truss.
Yeah.
Liz Truss would call it the blob, or some other people call it the deep state.
Yeah.
But it's this like engine of no.
Yeah.
This engine of rule creation. And by the way, have you read Ian Dunt's How Westminster Works and Why It Doesn't?
I haven't, no.
Fascinating book. I recommend it to everyone. He talks about people getting a ministerial role. And when they get a ministerial role, they want to prove themselves. And if they want to prove themselves, they have to change something. So therefore, if they've got, I don't know, if they're in charge of prisons, they want to change parole. If they're in charge of education, they want to change. They're constantly changing things to prove themselves.
Yeah.
But in doing so, they're adjusting a system that might work already as best it can. But also, they're just creating new rules. And it's almost like if you work in government, your job description is create new rules. And so we've created this no system that you've talked about, which is fucking balmy.
For civil servants, the career incentive for any civil servant generally is pass legislation, but minimize risk. So there is very, very, very little reward for passing a major piece of legislation that leads to loads of economic growth. I mean, there's some, but there's very little. There's a huge, it could be career not ending, but it could be career delaying if you pass something where something goes wrong. We didn't expect that this would happen. This has become unpopular. This has backfired. That's the way you get in. That's how you get in trouble as a civil servant.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say, just on that point, that's really important. If you go out to Silicon Valley and you try and raise money from A16, Andreessen Horowitz, or any other big funders, they want to know your failures. They want to know what you learned. Like it's like when you've got kids now, when you sugarcoat your kids, you insulate them from learning about life. If we don't allow people in the civil service to make mistakes, they're not going to learn. Yeah. What we're doing is we're teaching them to not learn.
Totally.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right. So we've actually broken the system on both ends, right? Yeah. There's very little reward for getting it right, as most people would say. Making the state, making the country, the economy grow more, function better, or in the case of the economy, grow more. That's a good thing. We want you to get a bonus. We want you to get a promotion. If you do that, we want to roll out the red carpet for you. That's really not what the system does within the civil service. And I would agree with you. We would also want to say, hey, sometimes shit happens. In a private business, people make mistakes all the time. People are constantly making mistakes in businesses. That's
what did you learn?
The point is learning, adapting, recovering. The point is not to never do anything. That risk aversion, if you have that risk aversion, you never set up a business in the first place.
What did you learn?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
What was your mistake and what did you learn? It's like the minimum wage now that this is one of my biggest bugbears, is that anyone under 21 has a minimum wage. Actually, I don't think we should have a minimum wage at all. I don't think it should be illegal for two people to agree to trade together and agree a price. But I've noticed this entitlement now that exists with teenagers and young adults, because they're given a job with a minimum wage, they're given holiday, they're given all these things, and they're given employment rights. I think it should be very easy to sack somebody. You should be able to go, I don't want you anymore, because I think you get rid of look, there will be racists and misogynists who do horrible things. They're in a vast minority. The majority of reason when you sack somebody and want to get rid of somebody is you can't afford them, so you should be able to get rid of them, and they're a fuckhead because you want to get rid of them. And I think it should be really easy to say to somebody, you're fucking useless. You don't turn up on time. When you hear you're lazy, you're gone. So that person goes, I lost my job here. But we've created this protective state that allows them to go, well, that was unfair. I didn't get my objective and I didn't get this. So I'm going to take you to tribunal. And basically, if you don't give me 15 grand payoff, well, it's going to cost you more. And it's going to be 2 years with ACAS. It's a mental system.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to what you just said is this protective state.
Yeah, I think you can have safeguards to stop people from being exploited at work over their gender, their sex, their race, whatever, without having the heavily process-driven system that we have. What we have, as you've described, is we've created so many layers of process, both for hiring people and for letting people go, that really don't correspond to how pretty much any business wants to function. And it's making them naturally very, very reluctant to hire people and take bets on people. The worst example of this by far is continental Europe. Like, we are in a much better position than continental Europe.
How bad is it there?
I mean, in Germany, for example, if you want to close a production plant that's unprofitable, if you're Volkswagen and you want to close a production plant, you have to negotiate with the Works Council, which is a sort of government-sanctioned union, to get agreement from them that you can do this, even if it's loss-making. Like, even if you are losing money demonstrably year on year on this plant, and it can take years to get this sort of agreement.
Well, that's because Germany's... I mean, they did it in Argentina. They made
Yeah.
it almost illegal
Yeah.
to fire people because they didn't want people to not have jobs.
Yeah.
They would rather you as a business owner lose money but keep those people employed than actually make what is a sensible and rational economic decision.
And the result is that every month, per person, per capita, 10 times more people change jobs in America than in Germany. 0.1% of the workforce changes jobs every month in Germany. 1% changes jobs every month in America. And what that means is you just have a much more fluid, much more dynamic system. And the other effect is, and this is something that I think is easy to miss, is that you get much more innovation and risk taking because the cost of failure often is having to let people go. It's like, we want to invest in, if we're Meta, we want to invest in the metaverse. We want to hire a bunch of VR engineers and blah, blah, blah. Turns out that wasn't what the future was. A lot of those people had to be let go, which is a shame, but that's capitalism. That's how innovation happens. That's how it works. If you can do that much more cheaply in the United States than in Europe, then naturally you are going to do that in the United States, not in Europe. And so as we look at why is it that Europe has so badly failed in the era of technology, kind of digital technology, one of the big reasons is experimentation and innovation and risk-taking is so much more expensive. Like, failure is so much more expensive in Europe than it is in the US.
Yeah.
And, whatever about missing the boat on Facebook and Google, the big problem now that European countries are having, especially Germany, is electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. Like, the whole nature of the car market has shifted. And who could have possibly imagined that BMW, Volkswagen would be getting their lunch eaten, not just by American car companies.
China.
I mean, that's American car companies is pretty humiliating, but Chinese car companies, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people would have looked at you like you had two heads. If someone said, I'm going to buy a Chinese car. And the reason is that they have been able to innovate. They have been able to make huge gains in innovation, whereas the German car industry especially, but the European car companies as a whole, have just found it incredibly hard to innovate because the cost of failure is so high.
Germany's fucked.
I'm pretty worried about Germany.
Yes.
I'm pretty worried about Germany.
It used to subsidize Europe. It's really bad shape.
Yeah.
And the problem is good people will leave. There will be... And look, if you've got a great idea in this country, why would you do it here? If my son turned around to me and said, Dad, I've got a great idea for a business. And I was like, well, that's a technology business. You should be going to America. You can raise the capital. They'll support you. You'll be able to employ people in the right... Like, they get everything right.
Yeah.
Why would you do it here?
Yeah. It's a shame. And 10% of, like, 1 in 10 Silicon Valley founders is European. So Europe doesn't have any...
know that.
Yeah, well, Europe doesn't have any shortage of entrepreneurs. They just all leave Europe, or many of them leave Europe and set up companies in the US.
Sorry, I interrupted you just because on that Vetocracy, but I think it's such a profound point you make here. Is this your idea?
So Vetocracy is I don't know who came up with the term Vetocracy, but the idea that I think, I and other people that I work with and write with have is that we've set up loads and loads of Britain, of the British state and of regulation to be win-lose. We set it up so that, if you want to build a new football stadium near where you live, all the people around you lose, and you don't have any way of making them win. Like, there is just not a mechanism for saying, like, here's how I can make this in your interest, council tax cut or whatever.
And by the way, I already know that because I'm already getting hate messages on Facebook.
Naturally, because the system is set up that they can only lose. And as a result, everybody wants a veto. Everybody wants to protect their area, their home, whatever. So they all get a veto. And as a result, nothing happens. Nothing gets built. Vetoes are always used. And in my opinion, the way to overcome this is to create ways of making that win-win. talked about one way via kind of making local government work again. I think there are other ways. I think that, you should be able to enter into an agreement with those people and say, you know what, if we build this stadium, I mean, maybe it's something as simple as like season tickets or something. I don't know. Or more likely, maybe it's something like, if we earn this much revenue, then we'll share some of the revenue with you. Whatever the kind of mechanisms are, it should be voluntary. I don't want the state imposing these sorts of things. But right now, it's often illegal to make that kind of representation. The planning system will say, they will treat that as like a bribe rather than as sort of sharing the benefits. They'll treat that as a bribe, and the planning system here is explicitly supposed to ignore local benefits and local offers. The idea that we have is planners are like they're like godlike. They're maximizing the universe's welfare, not maximizing the welfare of the people in this area. So we've just crippled the idea of win-win. And to me, so much becomes like the upshot of everything I'm saying about housing. Same goes for infrastructure. Is that we're kind of sitting on pots of gold. We're kind of sitting on the ability to, like, we can kind of print money, not in the bad way, not in the print money is a bad analogy to use on this show. Yeah, we basically are, it's like we're sitting in the Gulf and we have these oil reserves under our feet, and all that's stopping us from drilling is the fact that the people around us don't want us to. So why don't we say, hey, you know what, you can benefit from this as well. So new housing, you can benefit from this. One of the, we talked a little bit about social housing, but one of the, I think, interesting examples that's quietly happening in London is what's called estate regeneration, which is where you take a housing estate, probably built by a local council at some point, and you say, a developer comes, negotiates with the housing association, the body that runs this, and says, we're going to redevelop this housing estate. We're going to add thousands of homes. Most of the new homes will be private homes. We'll sell those homes or we'll lease those homes, and we'll use the proceeds to also replace all of the existing old, cold, maybe not fully safe homes with new, bigger ones that are nicer.
Win-win.
Win-win. And in the last 10 years or so, there have been 30, there have actually been more than 30 now, but last time I checked, there were 30 ballots. So they now put these choices to the tenants themselves, so to the people who live in these places. And they say, like, what do you think? Here's the proposal. You will be moved out for 2 years or for a year, however long it takes. We'll put you into temporary accommodation. Then when you move back, you'll have a new home. And people absolutely love them.
Well, they're getting an upgrade. They're getting a free upgrade. I mean, the value of their property will increase.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a development that I've looked at in Poplar, just north of Canary Wharf, in a place called Aberfeldy Village, which is actually a housing estate, not a village. And it would add 2,500 units. It would add about 100 socially rented units, and it would replace all of the existing socially rented units. They put it to a ballot. I had 94% turnout, and 92% of the residents were in favor. This is like North Korea levels of support. And this to me is such a good model for how we can add housing, how we can do it in a win-win way, how we can, by the way, replace a lot of the old council housing stock that is not great to live in and is a bit dangerous, is really, really like needs to be replaced in some way, but we have no money to do it. And the key thing is the value of adding these homes is so great because the demand relative to supply is just so huge. The gap is so huge. So this is kind of a like an info hazard. When people in government hear this, they suddenly they kind of see dollar signs in their eyes and they're like, oh my God, think of all the social housing we could, this is where these social housing mandates come from. Like, we can add biodiversity net gain rules and say, you need to build a meadow here. And obviously these things add up and eventually you end up with nothing getting built.
And they'll fuck it up. They'll go, right, well, 100 social houses? I think we could build, we could build 600 social houses, right. And they'll just,
Which is why doing it at a really ultimately it has to be a bargain, and it has to be a bargain between the people who actually live there and the people who want to do the development. You don't want local government, you don't want the state, you don't want the central government stepping in and saying it has to be 40% social housing, blah blah blah. It has to be a bargain between the people who are there and the would-be developers. I think this is a really, really cool model. The other thing to say about social housing and Andy Burnham is Manchester has had a renaissance over the past 20 or 30 years. It's gone from a few hundred people living in central Manchester to hundreds of thousands of people living in central Manchester. It's really economically prosperous. Andy Burnham deserves very little credit for that. The people who deserve credit for that are the leader of the local council, of Greater Manchester Council, who is a Labour man, and the head of the corporation. And the leader of the council said a few years ago, we had a 0% social housing requirement, not a 20%, which is what it was at the time. We allowed them to build it with 0% social housing. The reason is if we required 20% social housing, we wouldn't get 20% social housing. We get zero. Just nothing would have gotten built.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of pragmatism and that kind of realism about we're actually trying to build houses here. We're not trying to attach all these riders to this. We're trying to figure out ways to get housing built that I think is really great. And I think helps get through the kind of vetocracy system that we've got at the moment.
What do you make of Burnham so far? I'm very pessimistic.
I'm very pessimistic. If I can, I think the only optimistic thing so far that I've seen, so we're about a week into him being Prime Minister, is that the announcements that he's made so far this week, and he could come out with rent controls tomorrow and I will look like a silly person for saying this, but the announcements so far have been like kind of whatever. They've been £2 cap on bus fares. I don't think that's a great policy, but like a centre-left government comes in, that's the sort of thing that you can kind of expect. Business rates, reduction for pubs and clubs. Like, again, I would do that at the local authority level. I don't think it's the end of the world. I am not at all excited. I'm like very, very nervous about the person he has made Energy Secretary. I think she is probably worse than Ed Miliband.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I think she's quite a bit worse than Ed Miliband. She may be less effective than Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband, the one thing that people who have worked with him always say is that he is a really effective minister. Same way Michael Gove, did some good things in government, did many bad things, I think, in government. But the one thing that is undeniable is that he was a really effective minister. He knew how to work with the civil service. He knew how to get things done. He's a very smart man. Ed Miliband is very similar, and that makes him dangerous. I was relieved when he was moved into Foreign Secretary until I realized that there's a lot that you can do via international treaties that can be very hard to get out of later. So I'm a bit nervous on that. I think there are some good signs. One of the junior ministers in the Treasury is a guy called Dan Tomlinson, who's just been made growth minister. And I think he has pretty good ideas. And I think, people on the left, people in Labour should care about economic growth. Many of them do. But if you care about workers' rights, if you care about workers' wages, conditions, if you care about better public services, you need economic growth.
Yes, of course.
And the Labour MPs and the people in Labour who get that are, I don't think they're embraced by Burnham, but they're not being fully cast out. So that's a good sign.
What are you worried about?
I'm worried about two things. I'm worried about measures like rent controls that are enormously destructive, but look good on paper and don't cost the government anything. So kind of essentially huge interventions that are really hard to unpick that cause massive destruction, but that are free from the government's perspective. So, they're hugely constrained by borrowing costs. There's very little that they can do on kind of new spending in that way. So they may look to things that are free that end up just being totally just destroying a lot of the housing sector. And there are other things they can do like that as well. I mean, the way we do renewables is an example of that. We put the cost onto bills rather than onto the taxpayer. And so the government's like, yeah, great, let's just do more. Like, hey, there's no limit to this because they don't bear the cost.
Yep.
So that's one group of things. And I think the net zero policy that I think is very destructive will be continued, which I think is a shame. And then I'm also worried about punitive taxes on the rich that are not really going to raise much revenue, but are there to kind of show what side they're on. Like
wealth tax.
Yeah, wealth tax. I think the combination of an exit tax. I think an exit tax is a terrible idea.
Yes,
and I think
agree.
the combination of that with a huge increase to capital gains tax is just one of these policies that is
Sam, I leave.
is popular. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would leave, right? A lot of people would leave. And and a lot of people wouldn't come.
Like everything I have is pretty much in assets.
Mm-hmm.
I've already paid tax on it. I've already paid a high rate of tax. I've employed people. I've paid employers' taxes. I've created jobs.
Mm-hmm.
If The reason I hate a massive increase in capital gains tax is they're assets I bought that was already taxed on, and that is an effective slashing of my retirement.
Mhm.
And I'm just, if he did, I'd be off.
Yeah.
My worry is can they introduce an exit tax without us knowing? That's my worry. Is like, oh, I'm stuck. I'm trapped.
Yeah. Like the budget happens and they say, midnight tonight.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not actually sure how it's happened when countries have brought it in. I don't think it would be crazy to go on holiday the week of the budget if
I'm
you're
not coming home.
Yeah, and this really
The problem
sad.
is that my residency wouldn't have changed.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
yeah.
possession is 9/10 of the law, so it's
Come and get me, fuckos.
Yeah. I actually think that's perhaps not a. Anyway,
He's going to tax us more. The budget next year is going to be very interesting because he's cutting certain taxes and he's spending money and he's wants to deliver things like his £2 bus cap. So I think the budget is going to be interesting next year. I think it's going to be a failure. I mean,
Yeah.
Look.
I mean, the fundamental question with Burnham is: do you think that the problem Labour has had, from a political point of view, do you think the problem Labour has had is Keir Starmer as an individual who has been almost singularly uncharismatic, bad at being prime minister? I mean, again, not a stupid man. I don't even think he's I mean, I have mixed opinions about him. I have a little bit of pity for him because I think he's just so unsuited for the job.
Yeah, he's in the wrong job.
In the wrong job. I think he actually has done some pretty awful things in his career as well. So I don't want to be too generous to him.
Yeah, fuck him.
And
he supports Arsenal. Fuck him.
Absolutely. I know. I'm a Spurs fan, so I really.
Hey, building a good team this summer, man.
I know. I'm excited, but
might not get relegated next year.
Yeah, if we could do better than 17th, then I'll be excited. But I think that if your diagnosis of Labour is they were basically getting the policies right, they just have the wrong front man, then maybe Burnham will be successful. If your diagnosis is they've totally dropped the ball on growth, they've totally dropped the ball on energy costs, they've totally dropped the ball on tax, then it doesn't matter who's in charge. Like I don't think Andy Burnham is particularly charismatic. I think he's actually pretty off-putting, but maybe I'm.
I think he's cringe.
I think he's very cringe. Yeah, I think he's very cringe. I think the t-shirt and the suit jacket combo to me is just it just feels so dated. It feels so like down with the kids. And anyway, that's fashion that I shouldn't opine on fashion. But I think that they're going to really, really struggle because I don't think the British public just wants more of the same, but with a different front man. I think the British public wants growth and
is
wants
anyone
prosperity.
Speaking that language to you, though? Anyone at all?
In government or in
or outside? Is there anyone around the sphere of politics who you're like? Because there's certain MPs I like.
Yeah.
I think Andy Griffith.
Yeah.
Or is it Griffin? I always get them.
So
the part of my brain that has names just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think he's pretty good.
Yeah.
He understands growth.
Yeah.
I think Liz Truss understood growth. I think she understood the need for it.
I think the best defense of her would be that she got the sequence badly wrong. Yeah. That the supply side reforms come first and the tax cuts are the reward for doing that well. I think that would be the best case defense.
But, I mean, you go first. Is there anyone you like? Anyone you're looking at going, if you were Prime Minister, I think we might have a chance?
Yes. I think, I'm not sure if it's wise for me to name them because I don't want to hurt them by association, but I think there are people. So I think the Labour Growth Group was good. Basically got the need for growth and basically got that you can get a lot of growth by making it easier to build housing, infrastructure, whatever. I think within the Conservatives and within Reform, there are MPs who, especially within the Conservatives, get how many mistakes they made. And I do think that there has been a change of kind of who's running the party. I have significant worries about the bench and the strength
old Lib
in
Dems.
depth. Yeah. I think that worries me, but I think I think basically Kemi Badenoch's take is right. I like. There are other Conservative MPs that I like. There are people in Reform who I think are quite good on certain elements of growth. And to me, the role of somebody like me, though, is to kind of work with anybody and to kind of say, to both try and persuade people that this stuff matters, but also to say, like, I don't care. If you're in the Green Party, you want to come to me and like, well, let's figure out a way. Nuclear power is the greenest form of energy. So like, why don't we figure out how to do that? Or whatever. I think that like what we need. I actually think that the ideas in Britain are not where they need to be. Like, I think what we need is an agenda for a government of any color that comes in and says we need growth. And I think people like me need to be able to say, here is your first 100 days. Here's the legislation. Here's the evidence. Here's how you manage the civil servants and so on. And we're not there yet, but I think
Do they knock on your door?
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd have you in there. I'd have you as Prime Minister. I say that, but like as a flippant statement. But
Like you, I'm too prone to speak my mind. And
I like people to speak. That's why I like Rupert Lowe.
Yeah.
He just speaks his mind. I don't often get interviewed because I'm not very good. I just seize up in interviews. And I was asked to do one by a left-wing podcast the other day, and they kind of went at me. And they're like, well, you support Rupert Lowe. Why? And I was like, because he's the only person I've heard talking about taking a sledgehammer to the state and focusing on growth. And when he talks about business, I'm like, oh, that guy understands business, understands the incentive. It's like, are you happy being connected with somebody who's something like that, racist? I was like, look, I'm not going to have that discussion, because it's like I say to the reform voters or the people who talk about immigrants. I was like, you could have zero immigration. You could kick out millions of immigrants. I said, if you don't sort out the economy, we're still going to be in the same position. You're going to be poor, upset and angry. I said, that stuff, there's nothing else we have to fix right now. We've tried to fix everything. We've just got to fix the fucking economy. Yeah. If we don't fix that, we've got massive problems.
And growth is then the key that allows you to fix many other things. Like, I think we need far, far stricter policing and criminal justice.
Yes.
I think we need more prisons. I think we need way more police officers. I think we need to be much, much harsher on petty crime.
Yes.
Like, I think it's unbelievable to me that we know that most petty crime is caused by people who commit like 10, 20, 30 crimes.
Throw them in jails.
Yeah. And you don't need a 3 strikes and you're out. You can have a 10 strikes and you're out rule, and it will do the same thing. Yeah. Because if you commit 3 crimes, you're probably going to commit 10 crimes.
Yes.
But all of those things, like right now, if you get into power, there's very little you can do there. We're so constrained on money. We're so constrained. I think you should probably do it anyway for what it's worth. But once we have growth, once tax revenues are rising, that's where you can then say, like, there are so many other problems that a small amount of money would help us reform the system, would help us in some cases deploy more resources.
But you could borrow money for the right reason if you've got growth.
Yeah.
You can say, okay, we're proving this model now. We need to accelerate a couple of bits here.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to start a business, you borrow some money to start a business, right? If you want to buy a house, it's like, well, I'm not going to save up for 25 years and buy that. I want the house now, right? But with government, we're not borrowing money for growth. Right. We're borrowing money to pay off the debts.
Right.
Or we're borrowing money to pay for voters. And it's so fucking maddening.
Yeah.
We've been going 2 hours. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, by the way. I think I just want to talk to you just a little bit on AI.
Yeah,
because
great.
I'm so pro AI.
Totally.
I'm obviously slightly concerned that a model just escaped.
Yeah.
and it might kill us all. But let's say narrow AI that can solve problems. I'm so pro
It's a big
AI.
deal. I mean, hopefully a big deal in a good way, not a bad way. But it's yeah.
Well, listen. So I discovered the power of Claude about 2 months ago, and I've been dialed in for the last 2 months. I'm so behind on so many things because I'm just dialed in. But for my football club, in 2 months on my own, I've talked about the show. There's even more now. I have built a complete system that manages every aspect of the club: player management, staff management, payroll, procurement, match day management, hospitality. I've built a integrated new ticketing system. We used to have 4 ways to get in the stadium. Now you buy a season ticket or a ticket, and it's integrated QR with a scanner on the gate. I know everyone who's in the stadium. We've got a mobile app for doing that. I've just built a mobile app for fans so they can scan the QR code from that. I've built a live app for the media guys. So rather than going to Twitter and Instagram doing every post, if there's a goal, they press the button goal, they select the player, it creates the tweet, gets the image, they press submit and goes out to both, but also keeps alive. Like if you put goal on our system, it goes 1-0, and that updates live for the fans and sends them notifications.
You should. I bet there are Premier League clubs who are significantly behind you on this. You should sell this.
They possibly are.
Yeah.
I've built I mean, I'm trying to think what else I've built in there. There's been loads. I've built. I'm building a brand new website. I've rebuilt Squarespace on my own, and I can show you it. And I'm 90% of Squarespace, and with a new website where it's all integrated. I've built. What else have I built? What was I working on this morning? Oh, Shopify. I'm replacing Shopify. But the great thing about this is and I've built a system for my manager to manage his players. There's a medical system. It's all integrated. So the level of integration is this. The manager used to give a piece of paper with his team sheet an hour before the game. He now just puts it into his system. He knows the night before. And an hour before the game, it gets emailed and released to people. That updates the team sheets in the system, which updates the app for the media team, so when they're putting goals, they know who to select through. That updates the payroll, so they know who's being paid. That updates the app for the fans, so they know the team selection. When a player scores, if he's on a goal bonus, it goes into the payroll because we've got every single part's integrated. I've done it in 2 months, all on my own. I used to have a company that built this stuff. I've genuinely done 4 years of work on my own in 2 months. It's made us better and made us productive.
Yeah.
And it's very high quality. Like some people are like, yeah, but it'll be a piece of shit. No, it looks like something you would go to a top consultancy to build.
Yeah.
I've done it in 2 months on my own. I want everyone building.
Yeah.
There's so much productivity gains there that I want everyone doing it. Sorry, there's my little...
I had the same thing as you, about the same time as you, where I was off, it was a Saturday or something, and I started thinking, I have a 2-year-old, and you start to think about like, what school do I want to send him to? Government schools website is terrible.
Yes.
Interestingly though, all the data is available you can just download it as an ODT file, or whatever, an open file. I built an app called School Finder, which is a map of every school in the country. So I downloaded the raw data, the entire raw data. I put it online. It's schoolfinder.co.uk. It's free and everything. It is brilliant. Like you can look at catchment areas. You can say, I want maths. I want you to rank the schools by maths ability or GCSEs, whatever kind of level you're talking about in my area within this circle. Whatever.
Amazing.
You can include any kind of data that's there that you want. That I think the government system is built for teachers and schools. My system is built for parents, and I'm kind of proud of it because it took me a few hours.
A few hours?
Yeah, it took me a few hours.
That's the point.
I mean, the first version took me about 10 minutes, and then I put it online, and a bunch of people on Twitter said, oh, hey, it would be really cool if you added catchment areas, for example, or that kind of thing. And I just think it's such a cool bit of evidence of how much it can change the balance of power between the state and individuals, or kind of individuals and incumbent companies, or whatever it is. It's just such a leveler in that sense. I think that, of course, we're really at the very, very beginning of an incredible exponential. And some people I know, and some of the smartest people I know, think the world is going to be like literally unrecognizable in 18 months. And I take them seriously. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
I take that very seriously because a lot of these people have been right. That's the thing. A lot of the most crazy predictions about 18 months, 2 years from now are from people who like almost bang on predicted like the maths capabilities of AI models. Bang on predicted the revenues that the AI frontier model companies will be making at this kind of stage. So I take that very seriously. And I think that Britain's place in the world, if that happens, is very, very worrying to me. But the interesting thing is, and this is me talking my own book a bit, but for a while we've had a bit of a free pass with software, because software kind of inherently wasn't a physical technology. AI is a physical technology. AI requires compute. It requires energy. The amount of compute that exists and the amount of energy supply and the reliability of that energy supply directly affects not just like availability of models, but the quality of models, both in training and in using them via inference. So in a funny way, we've ended up in a world where even more, I said earlier that building stuff is important because it affects where people can go. But now building stuff matters because it affects the quality of the AI models that you can train and use. And
someone's screaming outside. Can we hear? What are they doing? Ban AI, is it? Well, I think it's going to become a problem for government in a really interesting way. What you just built there.
Yeah.
So I built this one called Show Us Receipts. I spent 3 days, and all I did is I took every single MP and I sucked in every one of their tweets and I fact checked them against primary sources. And and it's incredible. Like every tweet was coming in. It was
Yeah.
like true, mostly true, false, misleading. And then what I was doing is like, then I did a league table of MPs who tells the most bullshit, who tells the most truth.
Yeah.
And then I did it by party. And I've got this whole ranking system. And then I built one for Makerfield for the by-election. And then I was like, oh, do you know what I'm going to do? Question time. I'm going to live suck in everything they're saying. I'm going to fact check them saying they're talking shit.
Wow.
The only reason I stopped for two reasons. One, it was very expensive to process.
Yeah, I was wondering how much that cost.
Well, so just to suck in last 50 tweets of MPs, it was about $6,000. And then there was mistakes coming in. So like it was little things like somebody said something, said false, but actually they were commenting on a retweet and the thing they were so it just needs some more work. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to get it out there, but I have to get it 100% accurate as close as possible because I don't want to get sued.
Yeah.
And I could get sued because of this country. If we have free speech, then I'd maybe get away with it. But again, if I get that right and I nail it, then it's going to make politicians think, I can't bullshit.
Yeah.
I can't manipulate people. And I just think a lot of the people I like who talk about the fact they hate democracy always talk about these parallel institutions.
Yeah.
I think AI is going to give this parallel universe where we can hold government to account, which ultimately means we'll hopefully make better decisions. I did want to have another bit in it. It's called Check My Bias, where you yourself can check if your own ideology is stopping you make sensible decisions. So rent controls are a great one. If you're a leftist and you want rent controls, just check your bias on there because it's ultimately going to make housing stock worse for the people you're saying you want to help. So anyway, I'm so fucking excited, Sam. I'm so excited about it.
I think, I'm overall really excited. I have a couple of fears. The big fear I have really is the US cutting off access to frontier models for the rest of the world. Maybe on security grounds, maybe on kind of economic protectionism grounds. I think it would be unwise for them to do that. Like, I think the US is better off if Britain's rich, if Europe is rich, and so on. But I'm worried that they might do that, and I think that could be really bad.
That's a serious worry.
Yeah. I'm worried about the thing. I think that there will be a lot of turbulence. I think that there will be everything from, chatbots convincing teenagers to self-harm and stuff like that, all the way up to, I'm a bit skeptical of kind of biological weapons being, it being possible to produce bioweapons with AI, but I don't think we can rule it out at all. So I think there's a lot of risk on that kind of front. And I'm worried both about those risks, but I'm also worried about an excessive backlash. Like, I think that the concern that I have is, like, I think there will be
war against the machines.
Yeah, I think there will be job losses, but I think there'll be job creation as well. And my fear is that people see the job losses but don't see the job creation, and that we end up with, I think some sort of safety type regulations that stop people from being able to make biological weapons if that becomes possible. Like, maybe that makes sense, but I think stopping data centers from being built because people are worried about their jobs is crazy and is really, really, really worrying to me. And I do think, we invented in the 1950s the best form of energy generation ever known to man in the form of nuclear power. And where are we now? Like, nuclear power is completely unviable. Nuclear power is incredibly safe. Even in the 50s and the 60s, nuclear power was incredibly safe. At that point, it was competitive with coal in terms of cost. Forget about all the benefits, the environmental benefits, blah, blah, blah. It was just cheaper than coal. And what have we done to nuclear power? We've made it essentially unusable without like massive state subsidies. It's really, really sad. And I kind of worry that will happen with AI. My advice to people, politicians especially, who are worried about this is build credibility now. Like, understand how models work, understand how agents work. Like, the real tell, I think, of somebody on AI at the moment is whether they think of AI as being like a chatbot that you talk to in a Claude.ai window, or whether they get that really the key thing with AI is agents, like almost like people working for you and doing your bidding on the internet and on your computer and so on. And like, people need to get that in politics. And what I hope is that the people who understand that, yes, there will be choppy waters ahead, but we need to get through that, and we need to make sure that we don't just cripple this amazing technology. are credible on it. Because I hear a lot of politicians who basically have their hearts in the right place, saying like, this is going to be amazing, this is going to be the best thing that's ever happened to us. And I think they're going to look a bit silly in 2 years or 3 years when there have been a lot of problems and where AI is very unpopular and people perceive AI making their life worse, even if it isn't, or even if in a few years it will deliver, a cure for cancer or whatever. And I want people in politics who recognize this risk to build credibility now. You know the way Vince Cable in the 2000s basically gave a few speeches saying he thought the financial sector was too big.
Yeah.
Didn't really say anything significant, but then got credit for predicting the financial crisis and was seen as this like sage of economics for like a decade after. I kind of want people to replicate that.
Yeah.
Like just build a bit of credibility. Note that there are risks. That doesn't mean that you need to crack down on the technology necessarily. That doesn't mean that we need to stop. Certainly doesn't mean we need to stop this technology from being rolled out. But build a bit of credibility so that if and when the public backlashes against AI, they have people other than Zach Polanski and the anti-corporate left to turn to as people they consider to be credible.
Yeah, amazing. Sam, look, great. This was amazing. Firstly, where do you want to send people?
Worksinprogress.co. It's a magazine about economic growth, scientific progress, technological progress. We're a print magazine, by the way. And we're on. Thank you. And we're online. I'm really proud of it. And one of the forthcoming pieces that we have is all about the Chinese growth machine and how it's powered by cities and competition between city governments, not powered by top-down direction by Beijing. It's fascinating, and I think we have a lot to learn from it.
We will shove it in the show notes. We should do this again.
I'd love to.
As soon as possible. There's so much more I want to talk to you about. We've got our individual birthday celebrations to go and sort out. But thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for listening.
I've had a great time. Thanks for having me.
See you soon.